The ancient stones of Edinburgh Castle had witnessed countless ceremonies, but none quite like what was being planned in the hushed corridors of power that autumn morning. Lady Margaret Thornfield, the King's private secretary for Scottish affairs, carefully reviewed the documents spread across her mahogany desk. The proposal had been months in the making, discussed in whispered conversations between King Charles and his most trusted advisors. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, had no idea what was unfolding behind the scenes. She was currently in her private study at Kensington Palace, reviewing her schedule for the upcoming week. The morning light filtered through the tall windows as she sipped her tea, unaware that her life was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. The king had been contemplating this decision since his coronation. He understood the weight of tradition, the delicate balance between honoring the past and embracing the future. Scotland held a special place in his heart, and he knew that Catherine's genuine connection with the Scottish people during her visits had not gone unnoticed. Her work with mental health initiatives in the Highlands, her support of Scottish artisans, and her natural warmth when meeting with local communities had earned her a respect that went beyond mere protocol. In the depths of the Scottish Parliament building, First Minister Ilian MacLeod was having an intense discussion with his senior advisors. The proposal from Buckingham Palace had arrived through official channels 3 weeks earlier, and it had sparked debates that stretched late into many evenings. This was not a decision to be taken lightly. Scotland's relationship with the monarchy had evolved over centuries, and any new title creation required careful consideration of historical precedent and contemporary political sensibilities. The precedent is there, argued Professor James Sinclair, the parliamentary historian who had been consulted on the matter. We've seen similar honors bestowed throughout Scottish history, though admittedly, never quite under these circumstances. He adjusted his glasses and pointed to a passage in one of the ancient texts spread before them. The key is ensuring that this honor reflects genuine service to Scotland, not merely ceremonial gesture. Meanwhile, at Balmoral, King Charles walked the familiar paths of the estate, his mind heavy with the significance of what he was proposing. The Scottish landscape had always provided him clarity, and he needed that now more than ever. His grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II, had cherished her Scottish heritage, and he felt a deep responsibility to honor that legacy while forging his own path as monarch. The title he had in mind was not arbitrary. It carried historical weight, connecting to a lineage that had been dormant for over 2 centuries. The research had been exhaustive, involving historians from both England and Scotland, genealogists who traced bloodlines back through the mists of time, and constitutional experts who ensured that every aspect of the proposal would withstand scrutiny. Catherine's work in Scotland had been substantial and meaningful. Her mental health advocacy had led to the establishment of 3 new support centers in remote Highland communities. She had personally visited these areas multiple times, often staying overnight in local accommodations rather than rushing back to Edinburgh or London. Local residents spoke of her genuine interest in their challenges, her willingness to listen, and her follow-through on promises made during visits. The princess had also championed Scottish arts and culture in ways that went beyond typical royal patronage. She had learned basic Gaelic phrases, not for show, but because she wanted to connect more deeply with native speakers in the Outer Hebrides. Her support of traditional Scottish textile workers had resulted in international orders that revived several struggling communities. These were not grand gestures designed for headlines, but consistent, thoughtful actions that demonstrated a true commitment to Scottish welfare. In the palace, the King's Equerry, Sir David Hartwell, was coordinating with multiple departments to ensure that every detail of the ceremony would be perfect. The logistics alone were staggering. Security considerations, media management, protocol requirements, and the delicate matter of guest lists all required careful attention. This would not be a simple announcement. It would be a full ceremonial event that honored both tradition and the significance of the moment. The Scottish Parliament building buzzed with unusual activity. Members who had initially been skeptical of the proposal found themselves reconsidering as they reviewed Catherine's track record in Scotland. Her nonpartisan approach to her work had earned respect across political divides. Conservative members appreciated her traditional values and respect for institutions, while progressive members valued her modern approach to social issues and her genuine grassroots engagement. Behind the scenes, negotiations continued about the specific wording of the title and the ceremonies surrounding its bestowal. Every phrase would be scrutinized, every tradition examined for its appropriateness and relevance. The king insisted that the title must have substance beyond mere honor. It should come with real responsibilities and opportunities to serve Scotland in meaningful ways. Catherine's husband, Prince William, was among the few who knew what was being planned. The burden of keeping such a momentous secret weighed heavily on him, especially as he watched Catherine continue her normal routines, unaware that history was being written around her. He found himself studying her interactions with their children, her dedication to her current duties, and her natural grace under pressure, all while knowing that these qualities would soon be tested in new ways. The technical aspects of creating a new Scottish title proved more complex than initially anticipated. Constitutional lawyers on both sides of the border worked to ensure that the title would be recognized not just in Scotland and England, but throughout the Commonwealth. Precedents were studied, from the ancient Kingdom of Scotland through the Acts of Union and into the modern era. Every legal consideration had to be addressed to avoid future complications. Public opinion polling, conducted discreetly through several independent organizations, showed encouraging results. Scottish citizens who were aware of Catherine's work in their communities expressed overwhelming support for recognition of her contributions. The polling also revealed a sophisticated understanding among Scots of the difference between political and ceremonial honors, with most viewing a royal title as appropriate recognition for genuine service. The media, still unaware of the developing situation, continued their routine coverage of royal activities. Catherine's recent visit to a youth center in Glasgow had received positive coverage, but nothing suggested the momentous changes that were about to unfold. The Royal Press Office worked carefully to maintain normal scheduling while secretly preparing for what would likely become one of the most significant announcements of the king's reign. International implications were also being considered. Scotland's unique position within the United Kingdom, its relationships with other European nations, and its cultural connections with Scottish communities worldwide all factored into the planning. Diplomatic channels were quietly informed that a significant announcement regarding Scottish honors was forthcoming, though specific details remained closely guarded. The king spent hours reviewing historical accounts of similar ceremonies, seeking to understand how past monarchs had balanced tradition with innovation. He studied the pageantry, the symbols, the words that had echoed through centuries of Scottish history. This was not merely about creating a new title. It was about weaving Catherine's story into the rich tapestry of Scottish heritage in a way that honored both. As the final preparations moved forward, security teams began their advance work. The ceremony would require coordination between multiple agencies, protection for numerous dignitaries, and crowd control for what was expected to be significant public interest. Every possible scenario was planned for, every contingency considered. The Scottish regalia, normally housed in Edinburgh Castle, underwent careful inspection and preparation. These ancient symbols of Scottish sovereignty would play a role in the ceremony, connecting the modern moment to centuries of tradition. Experts worked to ensure that every element of the ceremony would be historically accurate while remaining relevant to contemporary Scotland. Catherine continued her regular duties, visiting a children's hospital in London and attending a charity gala, completely unaware that preparations for one of the most significant moments of her life were reaching their final stages. Those around her marveled at her composure and dedication, knowing that these same qualities would serve her well in the challenges and opportunities that lay ahead. The stage was nearly set for a moment that would reshape not only Catherine's role within the royal family, but also the relationship between the monarchy and Scotland in the 21st century. History was about to be made, and those privileged to know what was coming could only watch and wait as the final pieces fell into place. The call came on a Tuesday morning while Catherine was reviewing correspondence in her private office. Sir David Hartwell's voice carried an unusual formality when he requested her presence at Buckingham Palace for an urgent meeting with the king. Something in his tone suggested this was not routine business, but Catherine had learned over the years not to speculate about such requests. She simply rearranged her schedule and prepared for the journey across London. The drive through London's morning traffic gave Catherine time to reflect on recent events. She had noticed increased activity around her security detail and some unusual coordination requests from the palace staff, but royal life often included mysterious schedules and last-minute changes. Still, there had been something different in the air lately, a sense of anticipation among staff members who usually maintained perfect poker faces. At Buckingham Palace, Catherine was escorted not to the usual meeting rooms, but to the king's private study, a sanctuary where only the most important conversations took place. King Charles rose from behind his desk, his expression serious yet warm. The room felt heavy with unspoken significance, and Catherine sensed that whatever was about to unfold would be life-changing. "Catherine," the king began, gesturing for her to sit in the comfortable chair across from his desk, "what I'm about to share with you has been months in preparation. It involves Scotland, your remarkable work there, and a recognition that I believe is not only deserved but necessary for the future of our relationship with the Scottish people." The king's words hung in the air as he reached for a leather portfolio that had been sitting prominently on his desk. Catherine watched as he opened it, revealing documents that looked both official and ancient in their formality. Her heart began to race, though she maintained her composed exterior, a skill that had served her well throughout her years in royal life. "For over 3 years, your work in Scotland has demonstrated a level of commitment and understanding that goes far beyond traditional royal duties," King Charles continued. "You've built genuine relationships with communities from the borders to the Highlands. You've championed causes that matter deeply to Scottish people. And you've done so with an authenticity that has not gone unnoticed, either by me or by the people of Scotland themselves." Catherine felt a flush of pride mixed with apprehension. She knew her Scottish work had been meaningful to her personally, but she had never considered it in the context of formal recognition. The king's tone suggested something far more significant than a simple thank you or additional patronage. "What I'm proposing," the king said, his voice growing more formal, "is the creation of a new Scottish title, one that recognizes your contributions while providing a platform for even greater service to Scotland. This would be the Duchess of Rothesay, a title that carries both historical significance and contemporary relevance." The words hit Catherine like a gentle wave. She had studied enough royal history to understand the weight of what was being offered. The title of Rothesay held ancient connections to Scottish royalty, and its revival would represent something unprecedented in modern times. She felt the magnitude of the moment settling around her like a heavy but beautiful cloak. "Your Majesty," Catherine managed, her voice steady despite the emotion building within her, "I am deeply honored by this proposal, but I must ask about the implications. This would be more than ceremonial, wouldn't it?" The king smiled, appreciating her immediate understanding of the complexity involved. "Indeed it would. This title would come with real responsibilities, opportunities to represent Scottish interests in new ways, and a platform to expand the work you've already begun. It would also require approval from the Scottish Parliament, something that has never been done before for a title of this nature." Over the following hour, the king outlined the extraordinary process that would unfold. The Scottish Parliament would debate the proposal, examining not just Catherine's qualifications, but the broader question of monarchy's role in contemporary Scotland. It would be democracy and tradition intersecting in ways that had never been tested before. Catherine learned that preliminary discussions with Scottish political leaders had been encouraging, but nothing was guaranteed. The Parliament would need to be convinced that this honor served Scottish interests, not merely royal ceremony. Her track record would be scrutinized, her future commitments evaluated, and her understanding of Scottish culture and needs assessed. "There will be challenges," the king warned. "Some will question whether any member of the royal family should receive new Scottish honors. Others will examine every aspect of your Scottish work for signs of political bias or superficial engagement. You'll need to be prepared for a level of scrutiny that may be uncomfortable." Catherine appreciated his honesty. She had experienced intense media attention before, but this would be different. This would involve political debate, public discourse about monarchy's role in modern Scotland, and questions about her own worthiness for such recognition. The prospect was both thrilling and daunting. The practical preparations began immediately. Constitutional experts briefed Catherine on the historical precedents and legal framework surrounding the proposed title. She learned about the ancient dukedom of Rothesay, its connections to the heir apparent to the Scottish throne, and how the new title would relate to but remain distinct from that historical legacy. Scottish historians were brought in to ensure Catherine understood the cultural and political context of what was being proposed. She spent hours learning about Scotland's complex relationship with the monarchy throughout history, the significance of parliamentary approval, and the expectations that would come with formal recognition of her work. Language lessons intensified as Catherine worked to improve her Gaelic, recognizing that the ceremony would likely include traditional elements that required more than basic understanding. She practiced pronunciation with native speakers, studied the cultural contexts behind specific phrases, and worked to understand the nuances that would demonstrate genuine respect for Scottish traditions. Meanwhile, in Edinburgh, the Scottish Parliament prepared for what many members recognized would be a historic session. Committee hearings were scheduled to review Catherine's work in detail, examining everything from her mental health initiatives to her support of Scottish arts and culture. Parliamentary researchers compiled comprehensive reports on her activities, their impact, and their relevance to Scottish interests. The media gradually became aware that something significant was developing, though specific details remained closely guarded. Royal correspondents noted unusual activity around Scottish affairs, increased security preparations, and scheduling changes that suggested a major announcement was forthcoming. Speculation began to build, though most theories fell far short of the dramatic reality being prepared. Catherine's staff worked overtime to coordinate with their Scottish counterparts, ensuring that every aspect of her previous work was properly documented and presented. Letters from community leaders, statistics on program outcomes, and testimonials from beneficiaries were compiled into comprehensive portfolios that would support the parliamentary review process. The princess found herself studying Scottish law, learning about parliamentary procedures, and understanding the political dynamics that would influence the debate about her proposed title. She met with Scottish legal experts, political scientists, and cultural leaders who helped her grasp the full significance of what was being proposed. Security planning reached unprecedented levels as officials prepared for both the parliamentary sessions and the eventual ceremony. The intersection of political process and royal pageantry created unique challenges that required coordination between multiple agencies and jurisdictions. Every possible scenario was considered, from peaceful celebration to political protest. Public opinion research intensified as polling organizations sought to understand Scottish attitudes toward the proposal once it became public. The results would influence political calculations, media coverage, and the eventual success or failure of the initiative. Early indicators suggested public support, but the full picture remained unclear. Catherine's children were gradually brought into the conversation, with age-appropriate explanations of what might be changing in their mother's role. Prince William worked to help them understand the significance while maintaining normal family routines. The balance between public duty and private life would become even more complex if the title were approved. International diplomatic channels buzzed with interest as word spread through official networks that a significant development in British-Scottish relations was imminent. Commonwealth nations with large Scottish populations watched with particular interest, understanding that the outcome could influence broader relationships within the royal family's global role. The king's own preparations intensified as he reviewed every aspect of the proposal one final time. He met with constitutional scholars, political advisors, and Scottish leaders to ensure that nothing had been overlooked. The decision to proceed would be his alone, but he wanted absolute confidence that it served both Catherine's interests and the broader good of the monarchy's relationship with Scotland. As the final preparations continued, Catherine found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this moment. Her early visits to Scotland as a young royal, her gradual understanding of Scottish culture and concerns, and her growing commitment to meaningful service had all led to this unprecedented opportunity. The weight of history and the promise of future service combined to create a sense of destiny that was both humbling and inspiring. The stage was now set for a political and ceremonial drama that would test the boundaries of tradition, democracy, and royal service in ways that no one could fully predict. The Scottish Parliament chamber had never witnessed a debate quite like this one. As members took their seats on that crisp November morning, the weight of history settled over the proceedings. First Minister Ian MacLeod called the session to order, his voice carrying the gravity of the moment as he announced that they would be considering a proposal of unprecedented constitutional and ceremonial significance. Catherine watched from the gallery reserved for distinguished visitors, her presence adding an unusual dynamic to the proceedings. Rarely had the subject of parliamentary debate been present to witness the discussion of their fate. She maintained perfect composure, but those who knew her well could detect the tension in her carefully controlled posture. Member of Scottish Parliament Sarah Henderson rose first to address the chamber. A respected constitutional lawyer before entering politics, Henderson had spent weeks studying the legal precedents and implications of the proposal. Members of Parliament, she began, we are not merely discussing the creation of a title today. We are examining the evolution of Scotland's relationship with the monarchy in the 21st century. Henderson outlined the historical context with scholarly precision, explaining how previous Scottish titles had been created and the circumstances that had led to the current proposal. She spoke of Catherine's work in Scottish communities with detailed knowledge, having personally visited several of the mental health centers the princess had helped establish. I have seen firsthand the impact of the Princess of Wales's commitment to our communities, Henderson continued. In Inverness, I met with families who credit her mental health initiatives with saving their children's lives. In the Borders, I spoke with textile workers whose livelihoods were preserved through her international advocacy. These are not ceremonial gestures. These are substantive contributions to Scottish welfare. Conservative member James McIntyre presented a different perspective, though not necessarily an opposing one. McIntyre, whose family had served in various governmental roles for generations, brought a traditionalist viewpoint to the debate while acknowledging the unique circumstances they faced. The question before us, McIntyre argued, is not whether the Princess of Wales deserves recognition for her service to Scotland. Clearly she does. The question is whether creating new Scottish titles through parliamentary approval sets precedents we are prepared to live with indefinitely. Are we prepared for future monarchs to seek our approval for similar honors? Are we comfortable with Parliament becoming involved in royal ceremonial matters? The debate grew more intense as younger members of Parliament brought fresh perspectives to the discussion. Maria Santos, representing a diverse Glasgow constituency, spoke passionately about the need for the monarchy to evolve with contemporary Scottish society. My constituents include recent immigrants who have found hope and support through programs the princess helped establish, Santos declared. They don't care about ancient precedents or constitutional technicalities. They care about someone in a position of privilege using that privilege to make their lives better. That is exactly what we should be recognizing and encouraging. Liberal Democrat member Robert Sinclair raised practical concerns about the implications of the proposal, questioning how a new Scottish title would function within existing constitutional frameworks. His questions were technical but important, addressing issues of precedence, jurisdiction, and the relationship between Scottish honours and the broader British system. If we approve this title, Sinclair asked, what authority does the holder have within Scotland? What responsibilities come with it? How do we ensure that this becomes more than an elaborate ceremony and instead serves real Scottish interests going forward? These questions prompted detailed responses from government ministers who had worked on the proposal. Scottish Secretary Moira Campbell outlined the specific responsibilities that would accompany the title, including formal roles in cultural preservation, international representation of Scottish interests, and oversight of educational initiatives. The economic implications of the proposal became a significant point of discussion. Members examined tourism projections, cultural promotion benefits, and the potential for increased international attention to Scottish causes. Economist and MSP David Morrison presented research suggesting that royal visits and ceremonial events generated substantial economic activity, particularly in rural areas that often struggled with tourism revenue. The princess's existing visits to Scotland have generated an average of £12 million annually in tourism and related economic activity, Morrison reported, citing comprehensive studies conducted by the Scottish Tourism Board. A formal recognition of her role could potentially double that impact while creating permanent foundations for cultural and educational programs. Opposition voices raised important questions about democratic principles and the role of hereditary privilege in modern Scotland. Green Party Representative Linda Fraser argued that Parliament should focus on elected officials and democratic institutions rather than expanding royal recognition. While I respect the princess's work, Fraser stated, I question whether creating new aristocratic titles serves Scottish democratic values. Should we not instead be investing in elected local leaders who serve their communities without the advantages of royal status and resources? This perspective sparked passionate responses from members who saw the proposal differently. SNP member Hamish Drummond argued that rejecting effective service based on its source would be counterproductive to Scottish interests. The Princess of Wales has used her platform to amplify Scottish voices on international stages, Drummond countered. Her advocacy for Scottish mental health initiatives has influenced policy discussions throughout the Commonwealth. Rejecting such effective service because of its royal origins would be cutting off our nose to spite our face. The debate revealed complex divisions that crossed traditional party lines. Some conservative members worried about setting precedents that might diminish royal prerogatives, while some progressive members supported the proposal as evidence of royal adaptation to democratic oversight. The usual political predictability gave way to nuanced positions based on individual assessment of the proposal's merits. Catherine listened intently as members discussed her work with remarkable detail and insight. Many had clearly done extensive research, not just reviewing official reports, but conducting their own investigations and community consultations. The level of scrutiny was intense but respectful, focusing on substance rather than personality or politics. Mental health advocate and crossbench peer Dr. Jean MacLeod presented compelling testimony about the practical impact of Catherine's Scottish initiatives. Having worked directly with the princess on program development, MacLeod provided insider perspective on her commitment and effectiveness. The princess doesn't simply appear for photo opportunities, Dr. MacLeod testified. She participates in program planning, reviews outcome data, and maintains ongoing communication with service providers. Her involvement has elevated the quality and scope of mental health services throughout Scotland in measurable ways. Technical questions about ceremonial procedures occupied a significant portion of the debate. Members wanted to understand exactly how the title would be conferred, what role Parliament would play in the ceremony, and how Scottish traditions would be honored in the process. These details mattered enormously to members who saw themselves as guardians of Scottish culture and sovereignty. Constitutional expert Professor Margaret Thornfield, testifying as an independent witness, provided crucial guidance on the legal framework surrounding the proposal. Her expertise helped clarify complex questions about parliamentary authority, royal prerogative, and the intersection of ceremonial tradition with democratic process. This proposal represents a new model for royal recognition in the 21st century, Professor Thornfield explained. Rather than titles being simply bestowed by royal prerogative, we see democratic input shaping royal ceremony. This could be viewed as democratic strengthening rather than royal expansion. The afternoon session focused on specific terms and conditions that might accompany parliamentary approval. Members proposed various amendments and requirements, from regular reporting on activities to specific commitments about time spent in Scotland. These negotiations showed Parliament taking its role seriously, treating the proposal as legislation requiring careful crafting rather than simple approval or rejection. Youth representative and recent university graduate Emma McPherson brought a generational perspective that resonated with many members. Her research on social media impact and cultural influence among young Scots provided data about the princess's effectiveness in reaching younger demographics. My generation responds to authenticity over tradition, McPherson argued. The princess's genuine engagement with our issues and her willingness to learn about our culture has earned respect that no amount of ceremony could purchase. Recognizing that authenticity with formal honors makes sense to us. As evening approached, the debate's intensity remained high, but a consensus began emerging around the core question. Most members agreed that Catherine's service to Scotland merited recognition, though they remained divided on the specific form that recognition should take. The proposal began evolving through the democratic process, shaped by parliamentary input into something more robust than the original conception. The international implications received attention as members considered how the decision would be viewed beyond Scotland's borders. Would this set precedents for other nations within the Commonwealth? Would it influence discussions about monarchy and democracy in other contexts? These broader questions added weight to an already significant decision. As the session concluded, First Minister MacLeod announced that voting would take place the following week, allowing members time to consult with constituents and consider the complex questions that had been raised. The democratic process would continue, but the foundation had been laid for a decision that would reshape royal tradition in unprecedented ways. Catherine left the chamber with a deep appreciation for the democratic process she had witnessed and the seriousness with which her service had been evaluated. The week between debate and voting passed with unprecedented public engagement in Scottish parliamentary proceedings. News coverage extended far beyond typical political reporting, drawing international attention to what many observers recognized as a constitutional innovation. Catherine spent these days in careful preparation, knowing that the vote's outcome would determine not just her future role, but potentially set precedents for royal democratic interaction throughout the Commonwealth. Social media platforms buzzed with discussions about the proposal, revealing public opinion that proved more nuanced than traditional polling had suggested. Scottish citizens shared personal stories about encounters with Catherine, posted photos from her visits to their communities, and debated the broader implications of parliamentary involvement in royal honors. The conversation revealed a sophisticated understanding among Scots of the complex issues at stake. On the morning of the vote, Edinburgh's Royal Mile filled with observers from around the world. International media outlets had sent their senior correspondents, recognizing the historical significance of the moment. Constitutional scholars from universities across Britain and beyond gathered to witness what many described as a new chapter in the evolution of parliamentary democracy and constitutional monarchy. Inside the Parliament building, members prepared for what they knew would be one of the most closely watched votes in the institution's history. The chamber's public gallery was filled to capacity, with Catherine once again present to witness the democratic process that would determine her fate. The tension was palpable as First Minister MacLeod called the session to order. Before the vote, several members requested final opportunities to address their colleagues. Conservative member James McIntyre, who had raised concerns during the initial debate, surprised many by announcing his support for a modified version of the proposal that included additional parliamentary oversight provisions. "My concerns about precedent remain valid," McIntyre stated. "But I have been convinced that we can approve this recognition while establishing safeguards for future situations." The amendments proposed by the Constitutional Affairs Committee provide the oversight structure necessary to ensure this remains about service to Scotland rather than automatic royal privilege. Liberal Democrat Robert Sinclair presented the amended proposal that had emerged from committee deliberations. The modifications included requirements for annual reports to Parliament, regular consultation with Scottish communities, and specific commitments about time spent actively working in Scotland. These changes addressed many of the concerns raised during the debate while preserving the essential honor being offered. These amendments transformed this from a simple title grant into a contract for ongoing service, Sinclair explained. The princess would be committing to specific performance standards and democratic accountability. This makes the honor both more meaningful and more appropriate for our democratic context. Green Party Representative Linda Fraser maintained her opposition, arguing that the amendments, while helpful, did not address her fundamental concerns about expanding aristocratic recognition in a democratic society. Her position, while minority, was respected by colleagues who appreciated the consistency of her democratic principles. "I cannot support creating new titles, regardless of the service that inspired them," Fraser declared. "Our energy should go towards strengthening democratic institutions rather than expanding hereditary privilege, however well-intentioned." SNP member Hamish Drummond responded with passion, arguing that rejecting effective service based on ideological purity would harm Scottish interests. His speech became one of the most compelling of the entire process, combining practical politics with genuine emotion about the benefits Catherine's work had brought to his constituents. "In my constituency, 3 families have told me directly that the princess's mental health initiatives saved their children's lives," Drummond testified. "How do I explain to them that we rejected recognition for this service because of abstract concerns about democracy? How do I tell them that their children's lives matter less than our political theories?" The voting process itself carried unusual ceremonial weight. Rather than the electronic systems normally used for routine business, this vote would be conducted through traditional division, with members physically moving to indicate their positions. The symbolism was intentional, marking this as a moment requiring personal commitment rather than casual political calculation. As members began the division process, observers noted the careful consideration evident in each person's movement. This was not party-line voting but individual conscience at work. Some members who had opposed the proposal during debate ultimately supported it with amendments, while others who had seemed supportive expressed final reservations. The counting process stretched longer than usual as parliamentary officials ensured absolute accuracy. The numbers were verified multiple times before being announced. When First Minister MacLeod finally stood to declare the results, the chamber fell into complete silence. The motion to approve the creation of the Scottish title Duchess of Rothesay for Catherine, Princess of Wales, with amendments as proposed by the Constitutional Affairs Committee, has passed by a vote of 78 in favor, 37 opposed, and 14 abstentions. The announcement triggered extraordinary scenes in the chamber. Supporters applauded enthusiastically while opponents maintained dignified silence. Catherine herself remained perfectly composed, though those watching closely could see the emotion in her eyes as she processed the magnitude of what had just occurred. International reaction was immediate and overwhelmingly positive. Commonwealth nations praised Scotland for finding a democratic path to honor royal service while maintaining parliamentary sovereignty. Constitutional monarchies throughout Europe studied the proceedings with interest, recognizing potential applications to their own systems. Media coverage emphasized the unprecedented nature of the parliamentary approval process. Constitutional experts interviewed for television and print outlets struggled to find historical parallels, eventually concluding that Scotland had created something genuinely new in the relationship between monarchy and democracy. The King's response, delivered through official palace channels, struck the perfect balance between gratitude and respect for the democratic process. He thanked the Scottish Parliament for their thorough consideration and expressed confidence that Catherine would honor the trust they had placed in her through this recognition. Opposition parties, while disappointed by the outcome, generally accepted the result with grace. Most opposition members emphasized their respect for the democratic process and their hope that the amended proposal would indeed serve Scottish interests effectively. The tone remained constructive rather than divisive. Catherine's own response, delivered the following day at a carefully orchestrated press conference, demonstrated her understanding of the responsibilities she was accepting. She spoke not of honor received, but of obligations undertaken, not of personal achievement, but of opportunities to serve Scotland more effectively. The Scottish Parliament has placed extraordinary trust in me through this recognition, Catherine stated. I understand that this trust must be earned continuously through service, not simply acknowledged through ceremony. The amendments approved by Parliament provide important accountability structures that I welcome as guidelines for effective service. Legal experts immediately began analyzing the precedents established by the parliamentary vote. The combination of royal ceremony with democratic oversight created new frameworks that might influence similar situations throughout the Commonwealth. Law schools announced plans for symposiums and courses examining this constitutional innovation. Scottish communities that had worked with Catherine expressed overwhelming satisfaction with the recognition. Local leaders who had collaborated with her on various initiatives saw the title as validation of their own work and commitment. The democratic approval process had given the honor additional legitimacy in their eyes. Economic analysts projected significant positive impacts from the formal recognition. Tourism projections increased substantially as international interest in Scottish culture and history grew. Cultural institutions reported increased inquiries about Scottish heritage programs and educational opportunities. The amendments approved by Parliament created new administrative structures within the Scottish government to coordinate with Catherine's expanded role. These offices would manage reporting requirements, facilitate community consultations, and ensure that the commitments made during the parliamentary process were fulfilled effectively. International constitutional scholars began traveling to Edinburgh to study the documentation and procedures surrounding the vote. Universities established research programs examining the implications for democratic theory and constitutional practice. The Scottish Parliament's innovation was becoming a subject of serious academic study. Preparation for the actual ceremony could now begin in earnest. With parliamentary approval secured, the full pageantry of Scottish tradition could be brought to bear on creating a memorable and meaningful event. Every detail would need to balance respect for history with acknowledgement of the democratic process that had made it possible. Catherine's staff began coordinating with Scottish officials to implement the accountability measures included in the parliamentary amendments. Regular reporting schedules were established, community consultation procedures were designed, and performance metrics were developed to ensure that the commitments made during the political process would translate into effective action. The successful vote had created something unprecedented in modern constitutional history, a royal title approved through democratic process, carrying democratic accountability while maintaining ceremonial tradition. Scotland had found a way to honor effective service while strengthening rather than diminishing democratic institutions. As preparation for the ceremony continued, observers recognized that they had witnessed not just the approval of a royal title, but the creation of a new model for how monarchy and democracy might evolve together in the 21st century. The implications would resonate far beyond Scotland's borders for years to come. The morning of the ceremony dawned clear and bright over Edinburgh, as if the Scottish sky itself had conspired to create perfect conditions for this unprecedented moment in royal and parliamentary history. Edinburgh Castle, perched majestically on its ancient volcanic rock, would serve as the backdrop for a ceremony that would blend centuries-old traditions with 21st-century democratic innovation. Catherine woke early in her suite at the Palace of Holyrood House, her mind already focused on the significance of the day ahead. The weight of preparation, political process, and historical precedent had led to this moment when she would formally accept the title that Scottish Parliament had democratically approved. She understood that every aspect of the ceremony would be scrutinized, analyzed, and remembered as either a successful evolution of constitutional monarchy or a misstep in royal tradition. The ceremonial preparations had taken months of careful coordination between royal protocol experts, Scottish historical societies, and parliamentary representatives. Every element needed to honor Scottish tradition while acknowledging the unique democratic approval process that had made this ceremony possible. The result was a careful blend of ancient pageantry and contemporary constitutional practice. King Charles arrived in Edinburgh the evening before, bringing with him the crown jewels of Scotland, which would play a central role in the ceremony. The ancient honors of Scotland, including the crown of Scotland, the scepter, and the sword of state, had been removed from their usual display in Edinburgh Castle for this historic occasion. These symbols of Scottish sovereignty would link Catherine's new role to centuries of Scottish royal tradition. The ceremony would take place in the Great Hall of Edinburgh Castle, a space that had witnessed countless moments of Scottish history, but never quite like this one. Representatives of the Scottish Parliament would have formal roles in the proceedings, marking their constitutional approval of the title. This integration of parliamentary democracy with royal ceremony created protocols that had never been attempted before. International dignitaries began arriving 2 days before the ceremony, recognizing the constitutional significance of what was occurring. Prime ministers and presidents from Commonwealth nations attended not just to honor Catherine but to observe a potential model for their own constitutional evolution. The guest list read like a catalog of global leadership interested in the intersection of tradition and democratic innovation. Scottish communities that had worked with Catherine were represented by delegates chosen through local democratic processes. These individuals would participate directly in the ceremony, reading testimonials about the princess's work and formally presenting her to the king for recognition. Their presence transformed the event from a purely royal occasion into a celebration of community service and democratic participation. The morning of the ceremony began with Catherine's preparation in chambers that had hosted royal visitors for over 1,000 years. Her ceremonial dress had been designed by Scottish artisans using traditional techniques and materials sourced from throughout Scotland. Every thread and ornament carried symbolic meaning, connecting her personal story to the broader narrative of Scottish culture and history. The procession from Holyrood House to Edinburgh Castle followed routes used by Scottish monarchs for centuries, but with contemporary modifications that honored the democratic process leading to this moment. Representatives from each of Scotland's 32 council areas preceded Catherine's carriage, carrying banners that depicted the various communities and causes she had championed throughout her service. Crowds lined the Royal Mile in numbers that exceeded all expectations. Scottish police estimated that over 200,000 people had gathered in Edinburgh to witness the ceremony, with millions more watching through international television coverage. The atmosphere combined festival celebration with historical reverence, as people recognized they were witnessing a moment that would be studied and remembered for generations. The ceremony itself began with First Minister MacLeod formally presenting Parliament's approval to King Charles, reading the exact text of the resolution that had passed with democratic majority. This unprecedented element placed parliamentary democracy at the center of royal ceremony, reversing traditional hierarchies in ways that constitutional scholars would debate for decades. Your Majesty, MacLeod declared in the ancient hall, the Parliament of Scotland, representing the democratic will of the Scottish people, has considered and approved the creation of the title Duchess of Rothesay for Catherine, Princess of Wales, in recognition of her exceptional service to our nation and her commitment to continuing that service with enhanced responsibility and accountability. King Charles received this parliamentary presentation with gravity befitting its constitutional significance. His response acknowledged both the honor Parliament had accorded Catherine and the innovation they had achieved in constitutional practice. The moment represented monarchy acknowledging democratic authority while maintaining ceremonial tradition. The ancient Scottish regalia played their traditional roles as Catherine knelt before the king for the formal bestowal of her title. The crown of Scotland was touched to her head, the scepter was placed in her hands momentarily, and the sword of state was held above her as the king pronounced the words that would make her the Duchess of Rothesay. Catherine, by the grace of God and the approval of the Parliament of Scotland, I create you Duchess of Rothesay, with all the rights, responsibilities, and obligations that accompany this ancient and honorable title, as modified and enhanced by democratic process and contemporary commitment to service. The words themselves had been carefully crafted to acknowledge both traditional royal prerogative and parliamentary approval, creating a formula that honored both constitutional monarchy and democratic sovereignty. Legal experts would later study every phrase for its implications regarding future royal parliamentary cooperation. Community representatives then formally invested Catherine with symbols of her service to Scotland. A Highland woman presented her with a tartan sash woven from wool produced in communities the princess had supported. A Borders farmer gave her a ceremonial key representing the rural areas where her agricultural initiatives had made differences in families' lives. An urban youth worker from Glasgow presented her with a book containing signatures from young people whose mental health had been supported through her programs. These presentations, integrated into the ancient ceremonial framework, demonstrated how the title connected to real service rather than merely symbolic recognition. Each gift carried stories of lives affected, communities strengthened, and partnerships forged between royal influence and local need. Catherine's acceptance speech, delivered in both English and Gaelic, demonstrated her commitment to honoring Scottish culture while acknowledging the democratic trust that had been placed in her. She spoke not of privilege received, but of responsibilities accepted, not of honors granted, but of service obligations undertaken. I accept this title not as recognition of past service, but as commitment to future responsibility, Catherine declared to the assembled dignitaries and the watching world. The Parliament of Scotland has created something new in constitutional history, a royal title earned through democratic approval and subject to democratic accountability. I pledge to honor that innovation through service that justifies the trust you have placed in me. The ceremony concluded with the singing of traditional Scottish songs, performed by choirs representing each region of Scotland. The music, echoing through the ancient stones of Edinburgh Castle, created an emotional climax that left few observers unmoved. International television audiences witnessed pageantry combined with genuine emotion in ways that royal ceremonies rarely achieved. The immediate aftermath of the ceremony saw unprecedented international coverage and analysis. Constitutional experts from around the world praised Scotland for creating a model that strengthened both monarchical tradition and democratic participation. The successful integration of parliamentary approval with royal ceremony provided a template that other constitutional monarchies began studying for potential adaptation. Catherine's first official act as Duchess of Rothesay was to meet with Scottish parliamentary leaders to establish the reporting and accountability mechanisms that had been part of the approval process. This working meeting, conducted while she still wore her ceremonial robes, symbolized the ongoing relationship between her royal role and democratic oversight. Economic impacts were immediately apparent as tourism agencies reported dramatic increases in bookings for Scottish travel. International interest in Scottish culture, history, and educational opportunities surged following the ceremony's global coverage. Museums, universities, and cultural institutions prepared for unprecedented international attention. The ceremony's success encouraged discussions about similar innovations in other Commonwealth nations. Canadian and Australian constitutional experts initiated conversations about how democratic elements might be integrated into their own royal recognition processes. The Scottish model became a subject of serious study throughout the Commonwealth and beyond. Catherine's transformed role required immediate implementation of the enhanced service commitments she had made during the parliamentary process. New staff positions were created to coordinate her Scottish activities, community consultation processes were established, and reporting mechanisms were put in place to ensure accountability to Parliament and the Scottish people. International media coverage emphasized the ceremony's unique achievement in strengthening both monarchical and democratic institutions simultaneously. Rather than viewing royal ceremony and parliamentary democracy as competing forces, Scotland had demonstrated how they might work together to create more meaningful and accountable public service. The long-term implications of the ceremony would unfold over years and decades, but immediate reactions suggested that Scotland had successfully navigated constitutional innovation without sacrificing either democratic principles or ceremonial tradition. The Duchess of Rothesay would now begin the real work of justifying the trust that had been placed in her through both royal appointment and democratic approval. As the celebration continued throughout Edinburgh and across Scotland, observers recognized that they had witnessed not just the creation of a new royal title, but the birth of a new model for how constitutional monarchy and parliamentary democracy might evolve together in the 21st century. History had been made, and its implications would resonate far beyond Scotland's borders for generations to come. The ancient stones of Edinburgh Castle had witnessed the dawn of a new chapter in constitutional history, one that honored the past while embracing democratic innovation for the future.